Welcome to my humble little office. My name is R. Keith Andrews. I'm a spiritual guide and paranormal adept. The journey continues today on January 30th, 2026 at approximately 8 p.m. PST. Now, I bill myself today. Try that again. Now, I've made it my life calling to remind people that working together, we can make this a better world for virtually everybody. I bill myself as a spiritual guide because the tools I offer are the exact same tools I personally use in my day-to-day life. And the philosophies of life I talk about are the same philosophies I guide virtually every decision I make by. With this in mind, I know these tools will work for you because they continue to work for me and have literally worked for thousands of other people over the years with varying degrees of success, depending on their own personal efforts. Now, where are we? Now, before we get into things, I do want to tip my hat to Storm. He is the primary moderator and he hides in the background a lot of the time to ensure that tech runs right, and any problem children are gone before they become problems. Yeah, let's see. We have L.A. Moon in the chat room. She is our primary moderator in the chat room, and she tends to keep an eye on problem people. Keeps the conversation going here. And also, and this is much more important in my eyes, she keeps a very close eye on what my health is doing. No point in having another heart attack on here. Actually, come to think of it, I haven't done that yet. That could be entertaining for some people. But I'm not allowed to die anymore. Then we have Kira Ava in the chat room. She is also one of our moderators. And she's also the one that told me I wasn't allowed to die anymore. I guess, 11 dead is enough. But we could go after a baker's dozen. But, now, do we have anybody else floating around at this point? No. So, we go to this side of it, and we have Eternity Eternal. You are in with the gold. How are you doing, Eternity? Glad you could join us. And Mike Jones, you have come in with silver. How's it going? I know things tend to get a little on the hectic side for you, so I hope things are in that you're staying on top of them. And then Operation Shutdown, you are in with the bronze. How you doing? Now, the Mobian Homeworld is what we're discussing tonight. So let's see if we can, that's where things end there. Now, we got to understand a couple of things here. The Mobian Homeworld, NASA already knows about. I know this because when I was looking around decades back, I came across the astrological ephemeris for Mobius, and it was literally found through a link from a NASA site. Now, Mobius is sitting literally in the exact same orbit as Earth, but on the other side of the sun. Now, the whole construction of Mobius, I learned about a long time ago. Well, quite frankly, I watched it built, but that's another lifetime. In case you haven't figured it out, I'm actually not quite that old, at least not physically in this body. But Mobius was put there, unlike Earth, which is a Caboran. Mobius is a chunk of rock. Okay. And the Mobians, who used to be on Earth, they were Lemurians until about 50,000 years ago, when they colonized Mobius. Okay, now you gotta remember, the Lemurians had the capacity for physical manifestation. Okay, they could think about having something, and it would show up in their hand. Oh, this is going to sound real cold, Mike. Mike just today is saying he's well, but he's dealing with snow. Around here, that's called a 4-letter word. But, and this is where it's going to sound cold, if you pardon the pun, better on your doorstep than mine. Of course, I don't tend to leave the house much, so, the whole idea of snow being on the doorstep isn't as big of a problem. But when the Lemurians were here, a group of them like literally millennia before before the actual accident that wiped them out. A group of them collected together and left Earth. Okay, they decided they were going to go and take a look at a frontier planet. In this case, Mobius. Now, the reality is, we knew a lot at that point about the solar system, not the least of which is there were more than 9 planets. So, when the Lemurians got over to Mobius, they colonized it. It was an unoccupied planet, not uninhabited, but there wasn't a sentient race on it. Okay, not from even what you would call human standards. Okay, it's very similar to Earth in a lot of ways, with the one exception: no humans. And some people would say, well, there's a downside. I'm looking at it going, I'm not sure what it is. But the reality of it is, over in Mobius, they were able to take the wilderness and they built their homes around nature. Instead of clear cutting the lands, they literally build their houses with, for instance, trees growing through them. Okay, or for that matter, a river going through the front room. Now, I will tell you, they got a little eccentric. But when you've got the capacity to just think about what you desire, at that point, they had started working on the physical artistic side. Because about 55,000 years ago, Lemurians had evolved an incredible amount where physical manifestation was easy. If you think about it, you had it. And they decided we decided we were going to start in on creative artwork. Now understand, it started out as just stacking stones or leaning sticks together and evolving from that standpoint. Well, when the Lemurians got to Mobius, they decided they were going to push the artistic side. Now, understand, they never put the possibility of physical manifestation aside. They still maintained their ability with it, but they spent a lot more time physically creating artwork. Still, with the entire population mentally linked. Now understand, Mobians are not a hive mind. They all have their own individual minds. But their world is very similar in configuration to Earth. Okay? With the one exception that it doesn't have the pollution factor. Of course, they managed to turn around when they got there. They settled in and started learning how nature worked on that world. Never mind how it worked on Earth, because that didn't matter anymore. So they started looking into the natural side of things and figuring out how to interact with it. Well, understand, yes, they still hunt and that sort of thing, but everybody knows it is part of the natural order of things. So when you start looking at what they did, yes, they can walk out in the woods, and you could interact with the different animals. Okay, even the plants you could walk around with, but there was still a natural order where certain animals and where certain individuals would end up terminated. Something to do you still gotta eat. Okay. But if you think about the way Earth was laid out, or the way that people talk about Earth, way back we had the Garden of Eden. You could walk in amongst the animals and everybody got along. Ultimately, on Mobius, that is literally what happens. With the added bonus that the plants and animals also work with each other. Now, when you start looking at the rules of the road, if you will, okay, yes, there is still hunting. But instead of hunting anything, what you're looking at is hunting the old, the weak, and the criminally minded. This is why Mobians don't have a legal system. They don't have this whole, this whole issue of trials and what have you. Okay, because in human terms, they have what they call what is called castle law, meaning somebody breaks into your house, you're permitted to terminate them. It's just that simple. There is no issue of, oh, you hurt me when I broke into your house. It's, oh, you broke into my house and you left by your feet. Mobius itself is very heavy into the physical arts. The only into your drawing, your painting, sculpting, and your singing and dancing, what have you. They literally are third in the way of artistic species I know of. You've got your Venusians first, followed by your Orions, and then you've got the Mobians. But they have a wonderful little outlook where they go, art is much more important than the rest of it. Now, here we are. Operation is asking, do Mobians still visit Earth? If so, what do they think of it? Well, number one, the short answer is yes. Okay. The Mobians do still visit Earth. They are, to say the least, disappointed in their forefathers having shut down the whole communication thing. They still see humans as being, when I talk about humans being very undereducated, and they do, because humans at this stage are almost unilaterally convinced that manifestation is not possible. Okay, and the Mobians still know how to do it, which brings that other neat little issue to mind. When you take a look at humans' ability to say, hey, we're going to chase them back, Mobians wouldn't have to raise a hand. They'd simply think about it and everything would cease. It's just that simple for them. And they still believe that there are humans here that will remember that and work towards it. What we have to remember where the Mobians are concerned is every time they did something, if somebody came along and saw them and saw another Mobian doing a sculpture, yeah, there was envy. As in, gee, I really like what you're doing. Can you show me how? But Mobians are natural born teachers. Okay. They literally are born with the idea, like it's instilled in them very early in the training, that you educate the uneducated. But they're also told, don't force the issue, which is why they have not come back en masse and gone, guys, your heritage says you can do this. Okay, humans are convinced they can't. And sad to say, whether you believe you can or you believe you can't, inevitably you're likely to prove yourself right. Now, before some genius comes up with this idea, understand all the positive thinking, all the self-belief in the world is not going to help you if you fall down a set of stairs. Okay? Gravity's still going to play havoc with your body and it's still going to hurt. Now, understand there are Mobians that are dark and ones that are light. It's a balance factor, and all of nature has to have it. There are Mobians that, if it weren't for the consortium guidelines or laws, if you will, there are Mobians who would walk in here and take over without even blinking, because they know what is possible. Okay. And the reality is, when we start talking about Mobians, something you got to realize is 50,000 years ago, I was here as a Mobian. I was a Mobian. Even 40,000 years ago when the whole thing collapsed. Okay. But the Mobians, they found out about the collapse. And they were already over in Mobius, but they were able to come back. they chose not to come back and re-educate the Mobians at that point. There was so much fear with Lemurians. There was so much fear on Earth that the Mobians figured, we just can't force the issue. So they didn't. Net result, the Lemurian Empire scattered to the four winds. Right? The Mobians, in the meantime, unified their planet entirely. Where they are, when they were here, they were simply connected with each other. Now they are connected with the entire planet. Now, understand that Mobius is not a Caboran. It is not a living entity. It's a chunk of rock. But the Mobians still are connected to everything else around it. Okay. And what they do now is that when they're doing their hunting, because they have to, they do not, by the way, have 10 billion people on the planet. You got to remember, Mobians don't age. And since they don't age, births are very rare. Primarily because, they don't require the pregnancy. When your population is at a comfortable level and you're not aging, the only time Mobians die is by accident or, literally, if they will die by accident, every now and again you get a Mobian that decides it's going to be a murderer. Okay? And then you lose a few more. But understand, because of the few of them that pass away, births are extremely rare. Now, I will tell you the last one I knew about was about 5,000 years ago. Okay? And that had nothing to do with volatility. That had to do with miscalculation and not realizing how quick the volcano was going to detonate. Unless I missed my guess, my throat is seizing. That should make this fun. It's a good thing we're only doing an hour. But Mobians are keeping an eye on things, and they are literally watching to see whether or not mankind starts turning itself around. Now, the reality is, like I said, Mobians were natural-born teachers. Even the youngest even the young ones would start teaching the tiny ones how to function. Okay, and this is something mankind has forgotten. Now, the Mobians they've got a global network. They didn't bother developing telecommunication lines, okay, until they started building starships. And by the way, when they built the telecommunication lines for that, they do not use hardwire between starships. Can't picture why not. But they don't have a land-based communication line for point-to-point on the planet because of the fact that they are linked altogether. They're completely linked anyway. They're still trying to figure out at this point why they didn't pick up on and they're grateful they didn't, but why they didn't pick up on the experiment that the Lemurians did. The issue of everybody shutting their heart off at the same time. Personally, I suspect it had to do with the radionic interference from the sun, meaning they couldn't make it through the static. Net result, the Mobians survived, the Lemurians, on the whole, dropped dead. The Lemurians went from 10 billion to about 100,000 people in less than a year. And there was a whole lot of problem there. But over in Mobius, they not only took their idea of artwork and turned it into a going concern. Instead of just thinking about building and having a building show up the way they desired, they went to the trouble of figuring out how to do things the hard way. The same way humans are doing them, but with a lot more advancement, technologically speaking. because Mobians have this idea, we already know how to do it, now we just have to remind our bodies. You guys have the same ability, by the way, especially if you're one of these people that believes in past lives. It literally boils down to an issue of you deciding that you're going to tap into your old knowledges and get to work. Okay, Mobians never gave that up. And many of them, I forgot about the other method they die by. There is a group of Mobians that literally what they do is they'll be there for X number of years, then they go, we're done. We're going to give somebody else an opportunity. And they literally, physically shut their heart off. Okay, net result, they die. But because they have not relied on physical manifestation, in other words, thinking about something to have it come into balance, because they don't focus on that, they have turned around and said, okay, we're going to build things solid. So when somebody dies, that item, that artwork is left behind. Now, this is one of the reasons why, because like I said, I was there 40,000 years ago when it happened. I just happened to be one of the few that managed to, well, one of the many, that managed to get my heart restarted after the fact. But this is why, right now, I've got so much on the go, so many self-help books coming out, okay, is because the information is there, and it's necessary. Too many people on Mobius, everybody takes a look at it and goes, okay, how can we help make this society more stable? How can we make travel a little easier without taking away from the physical aspect of it? In other words, yes, they've got such things as good hiking boots and that sort of thing. They never bothered with the heavy duty equipment except on the call them star bases, but wherever they have a launch pad for outer space, they've got a small technological contingent. That's the only place you ever find technology. You get to the edge of the city, you leave your vehicle behind. Okay, and even in city, they don't use a lot of vehicles. Okay, they use vehicles for transporting material. But when you go to leave the city, even if you're going to another city, you leave your stuff at the edge of the city, and you walk. Okay, they don't make, although they do have an interconnected mind, they don't just use telepathy to communicate. They also turn around and utilize their own vocal cords. Now, the neat part there is humans speak multiple different languages. Mobians speak multiple different species languages, because on Mobius, the animals and the plants also can communicate. But again, we don't have society per se. How you doing, Woo? Glad you could join us. The nice little part about it, when we start taking a look at Mobius, everything does, like, it all talks to each other. Okay, so yeah, we don't have war. There is no fear there. Well, there's some fear. There's no war. There's no famine. There's no greed. One of the important things you got to remember with Mobius, they went there because they desired to have a peaceful existence. And with the billions of people already on Earth, they figured they just went, we need a break. And it was only a small contingent of them, okay, that left. The rest stayed behind and subsequently died. Not necessarily the best option, although there are things to be said for it. So what you're looking at is a world where, when we talk about peace, mankind goes, oh, it's not possible. Everybody's got their own agenda. Even on Mobius, everybody's got their own agenda. The only difference is they're not trying to hurt each other. it's more often a Mobian is born and goes, I've been here for 700 years. I'm going to go do something else. But this is akin to humans when you buy a car and you're driving the car for a decade and you go, I think I'm going to upgrade. So I'm going to sell my car. Mobians do the same thing with the body. Okay, so there aren't that many people that end up, there aren't that many Mobians that end up dead because of either malpractice or because of well, definitely not because of murder. But there are those that are hunted by some of the animals. And again, animals only on Mobius, the animals and the plants alike, only go after the elderly and the infirm. And yes, on Mobius, you can tell that easy. Okay, so it literally boils down to a way of keeping a balance. And even the elementals and things like the Holic, the Wailosh, and the Cormoran, and the Caboran rather. Cormoran is a bird, by the way, at least if I remember correctly. But even they interact and realize that this is something that the balance of the planet is imperative. Now, why build starships if you've got the ability to manifest what you'd like? Well, the reason being, it gave them something solid to leave behind. Because in what they found was the Lemurian Empire, because they kept an eye on it, especially once they heard what happened. And there's no record of it to speak of. Okay, so these guys went, no, we're going to have something, we're going to leave something behind. But it really boils down to what you're looking for, but they don't try and erase the past when they are working on new. And bear in mind, some of the artwork that they've got is staggering. Okay, but you take, for instance, somebody carves a giant figure, and now somebody else wants to carve something. They don't consider it defamation or vandalism. If you're looking at a statue of a giant, right, a 60-foot statue, and you go into the shin, down below the knee, if you're looking at 60 feet, you're looking at about a 10 to 15 foot shin. And they don't consider it vandalism if somebody carves another figure into the shin. Okay. They consider that as an artist honoring that particular artwork. Okay. So we have a world. There is no war. You never even hear of a war. Okay, but what they are doing is they go, okay, and some people have strength on this one side. Maybe these guys have foodstuffs that the other side doesn't have. Instead of fighting for it, they swap it over. And I know this sounds like, oh look, this is an absolutely hippie outlook. Let's all love each other. On Mobius, it's not a thought process. It's literally the way they are. Okay. Now they didn't come by it without a lot of work. They had their problems. But they have most of their problems on Earth. Now, what are we looking at here? It does not look like I missed anything, which is a good thing.
It looks like you're okay.
Now, the nice little part about it, when we take a look at the Mobian Homeworld, okay, yes, they still have starships to come between the planets. Okay, but their starships are not these great big motherships. Okay, they don't have this incredible array of luxury things that they can do. Okay, I saw a Mobian ship. They didn't bring a mothership. They came over in a 2-man pod. Okay, And it's that kind of dedication to artwork and what have you, to their creative side and creative expression that enables them to do that. But here's the thing, you think about traveling. Now, mankind, and we should try one thought at a time, then speak. What do you think? They, number one, don't age, okay? Which means if you're taking a trip from the far side of the sun to Earth, you don't have to worry about aging, okay? The other thing they figured out how to do, and this was where their science took off at a staggering level, they know how to lock their planet, or lock their ships rather, into a static point on the galactic grid. Now, with that in mind, if you stop your own planet, your own ship here, and just sit in the orbital path, the planet's going to get there a lot faster than you will get around. Because you got to remember, just Earth only takes 365 Earth days to get all the way around the planet. On Mobius, they can stop the ship to wait for it to come all the way around the sun. Okay, and it's not a question of whether or not things are going to work. Okay, that is just the way they see it. So they'll take a two-man pod, hop off of their planet, and they'll lock their ship, their individual ship, into a geosynchronous standpoint on the galactic grid, and then wait for the planet to get to them. I'll tell you, it's a lot less stress than trying to catch up with the planet. Now, I'm no astrophysicist, so I can't give you calculations on how many days or how many years it takes. I can tell you, since they don't age, it doesn't matter to them. And in all fairness, I shouldn't really say they don't age. They choose when to age. So when you end up with a newborn, that newborn already knows that it has the ability, it's got the instinctive ability to remain a newborn as long as it and the parents decide to. When they decide to get older, they age. Now understand, they cannot reverse their age. Okay, it's a one-way transition. But what you find is that they get to a certain point and they finally go, no, I aged myself as far out as I'd like to. Now I'm just going to shut down. It's not considered a bad thing to turn your heart off. It's considered a noble thing, because by you ending your life that way, you open the door for somebody else to enjoy their life, to enjoy a new life. And this is one of the biggest things that we got to remember. Now, aside from that, when you start looking at the plants, okay, the plants are, when I say they are just simply plants, they're not sentient, but they are simply there as a food source. And the Mobians know this. Okay, I do that a lot. With the Mobians, they have one race, one species. Okay, so you're not talking about multiple different languages, except within the creative minds. You'll have a different kind of a language in different industry. Okay, but it's all the same basic language. So what you've got is a planet where they all work together, they all communicate well, and they all cooperate. Now, what do you think is going to happen if, as mankind gets off Earth, if mankind doesn't curb its violent tendencies? What do you think is going to happen to whoever sets foot on Mobius? If they set foot there with the intention of causing a problem, I can see a bit of a hiccup happening. Okay. And it really boils down to what you're going to do with it. You know, whether or not you're going to move forward. One of the other things that we got to realize with the Mobian Empire, with the Mobian planet, okay, because they don't have a whole pile of technology, they've got the starships certainly, and they've got a way to manufacture them, and therefore, yes, they have mining and all these other basics. What they don't have is a staggering propensity to walk into a natural environment and destroy it. Okay, and especially destroyed in the name of technology. For the Mobians, technology boils down to this: it's a way to make life easier when you're building something. But when you're changing your life, when you're learning a new skill, they do not rely on computers at all. Okay, they can, however, on a whim, shut them down. They use computers for, like, obviously for the starships. At least I hope it's obvious. They use the computers for that, but that's because they do not do the physical manifestation thing unless they absolutely have to. Prime example there would be if you've got a starship that's getting ready to fly off. Okay, and your researchers are ready to go, and there's a malfunction on the starship. Then the Mobians will use their higher senses to correct the problem before it detonates. Okay, so hopefully this is making sense. I know this planet sounds so much more relaxed and more, if you will, open than what Earth itself is, but it's clearly not as volatile as some planets. I mean, let's face it. When you take a look at the reticular Homeworld, this is definitely not a relaxing place to have a picnic. So you are looking at a planet that is still evolving. They're still perfecting their creative side. And like I said, the only two species that have gone beyond what the Mobians do are the Venusians and the Orions. Now the Orions took their creative side down a different road. Okay. Venusians went the way of the fine arts. The Orions went the way of dance. And the Mobians decided to go the way of physical building. Okay. Of machines, of adaptations that would help people. Okay. And do understand, because Mobians do not die, and they have the ability to manifest, though they don't use it often, mostly you don't get a lot of involuntary cripples. Cripples happen not because of a birth defect, but because of the fact that the Mobians decided that, no, I got hurt, but I'm just going to learn to live with it and call it an experience. Which is a weird way of looking at it, especially from a human standpoint. And what you'll find is on that planet, they don't control the weather. Technically, they could, but they came to the conclusion that it was way better to let the planet's evolution handle itself. So they don't interfere with that side of it. And they do participate in the same way that the animals do. If you're going to hunt, target the sick and the aged. Okay, this is a way of keeping your nature balanced, and they do that on an instinctive level. But they do come back here periodically to see whether man is evolving, and you'll be happy to know there are a few people that are still trying to evolve and trying to move things forward without aiming to take control. So this is one of those things that we take a look at and go, where do the Mobians go from here? Well, there has been talk recently of them lighting out to find a new planet, because they've been around now. They've been on their planet What do we got here? Oh. Okay. Yeah, I'm just glancing back and all that. That's something Storm's handling. So I will say thank you very much, Storm. I'll leave you to it. Now, I'm just looking to see what's coming. Yeah, that would be an idea. Because the only question I saw was whether or not the last question I saw typed was, do the Mobians still visit Earth? And if so, what do they think of it? And if that was your last question, yeah, I did see it. We actually spent a little time with it. But if you didn't hear it, just pop it in again. We'll keep an eye open. Now, the nice part about it is with the Mobians, because they don't have war, because they don't have the greed and that kind of jealousy, what you've got is mountain ranges that are actually carved into full scenic arrays that are done by groups of people, sometimes numbering in the thousands. But you got to remember the image there, or the possibility there, is because Mobians have the capacity to stay interlinked, which means the big picture can be painted for everybody. Okay, and yeah, like on Earth, there are those Mobians that have a lot bigger renown. The short answer to their operation is yes. They became members of the consortium millennia back. Okay, and therefore, they became members of the consortium when they were after they colonized Mobius. Okay, so they're a relatively new species in the consortium, but they do adhere to consortium law. Okay, and like I said, consortium law applies to consortium space, not to the individual planetary holdings. But the Lemurians are now at a point where they're starting to look to expand. But they're starting inside, they're starting in their own area. My suspicion is because of the fact they do have a couple of moons, they'll start there and then expand from there. But I've seen, and the reason I call it my suspicion is because it's one of these things that was literally laid out. Okay, it was literally laid out as a proposed expansion, but that was laid out several centuries back because they didn't know it. They didn't have the engineering to do it. Now they're working on it. I keep looking at this going, I am going to be so happy when I actually get my eyeballs replaced. Because this is just annoying.
Looks like we have a new person who just came in.
Who do we got? Jeffrey, how we doing? Glad you could join us. We have Jeffrey the Raven. Well, the short answer, Jeffrey, is it's been complicated, but we are getting back on our feet. And now we're literally walking people through it as we build an actual active empire. Okay. Yeah, I know that sounds like a massive undertaking. It is. But I figure I'm planning on being here for another 74 years minimum. Okay. Well, probably not minimum, but I decided when I was a kid, I desired to see the 22nd century in this body in functionally healthy shape. So there's been a lot of reworking and reorganizing, but one step at a time. Yeah, sad to say there, Jeffrey. I've always held work, Actually, I've always held family first, then work, then entertainment. But we are glad to see you're back. And you're back just in time, really. Just a quick note, guys. We have been out of production of Positive Perspectives, the free magazine we put out. It is being fired off. I was planning on today, but things got a little hectic. It's complete. So January's is coming out tomorrow. And then we're going to get February's out as quick as we can. Okay, but if you go to the link at the top of the stream to buymeacoffee.com/innervoicej, you can sign up for the free magazine. And rest assured, I don't sell the addresses to anybody. And you're going to be hard pressed to hack my database. Because here we are. There's the entirety of my database. Let's see any computer hacker get to it. It's old cardstock. Like I said, I'm a dinosaur. But the reality is, I'm taking a lot of the information I've got that I'm sitting on and turning around and getting it out there for people. Oh, no. No, definitely not. Woo asked, he goes, does that mean Arkeith Andrews is going to interface with technology to reach the 22nd century? No, absolutely not. The reality of it is this. I short technology out. I'm not about to put my life depending on it. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. And that would be great, Jeffrey. All of the contact information is there. It's an easy way to get to me. Okay. But, when we start looking at technology, I agree with technology, but get this. And Kara behind me here will tell you it happened. I was on the phone to my brother today. Okay. I was talking on the phone. And if you notice the way I'm holding on to it, the buttons for handling it are on the side here and on here. So I had it in my hand like this. I was just talking on it. My phone, while I was on the phone, decided to phone somebody else. And it was the weirdest thing. Well, not quite the weirdest, but because of that side of it, I'm talking to my brother, and all of a sudden my phoned the food delivery. I pay when she said hello. I'm like, oh, hi. I have no idea why my phone phoned you. And this sort of thing does occur. It's weird. Yeah, the neat little part when we take a look at my one in desiring to see the 22nd century, what I'm going to do while I'm here is do my best to encourage people to make certain changes to your own lives. Now, during a day in the office today, it was suggested. Where did I put it? Of course, I'm not going to have it here. It was suggested that I try and tangle a couple of extra topics that I hadn't bothered with. Okay, such as what can we do with, there we are. What can we do with diet? What can people do actively with dieting, with, where was it? Dieting, exercise, dating, and journaling. Now, these are topics that people apparently require assistance with. Understand, I am no Don Juan. Okay? I don't know if you guys even know who Don Juan is anymore. The educational system has, shall we say, become rather lackadaisical. But what I've seen over my lifetimes, and bearing in mind, I've had over 100,000 clients under my belt. Okay. I've got a reasonable database. I look at it. I've never actually heard of it before. You know, Jeffrey, I mean, I'm glad I'm not entirely glad it happened to you, but I've never actually heard of it happening before. You know, and it's always entertaining from my end. But what I'm looking at is I found out a few things that really shorten people's lives. Walking out in traffic while you're hanging onto a cell phone and staring at the ground seems to be a pretty high on the ranking. But there's a lot of things that people are doing that are absolutely off kilter. Jeff Garvey, how you doing? Glad you could join us. Well, Don Juan was down. Understand? I mean, Don Juan did have a way with people. My dating was a little limited. You know, you think about it. The first woman I married, I literally told her when I first saw her, I was going to marry her. I didn't say anything about what the future held. It was just one day I'm going to do this. Then I ignored her for a year and a half. But we did end up married. We did end up married for 16 years. You know, and what I found out was there are things that are very obvious that so many people are doing ineffectively. Not the least of which, and this is something you never have a problem on the Mobian Homeworld. Okay, they are dead honest. You ask them a question, they don't read between the lines. So make sure you're asking the right question. Now, that's a problem here. Okay, I ask a question and so many people turn around and try and figure out what I meant. Okay, I speak in pretty black and white English. Okay, sorry if you don't speak English, but I don't speak anything else. Well, aside from mumblies, stutteries, yawnies, I understand. I speak these languages. Although yawnies is a really hard one. But when we take a look at the Mobian Homeworld, all of their technology is built right into small communities that are built around things like their Starship program. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Jeffrey. The reality of it is that when everybody has the capacity to know, but what we're taught is to not trust our instincts. And this is one of the things I'm working on with both positive perspectives and positive perceptions and the additional issue of a day in the office. These are all things that every one of us is capable of. On Mobius, everybody works together. And this is why I say you can have 1,000 artists carving the side of a glacier in order to build ultimately a temporary artwork. Because let's face it, glaciers do tend to fall apart on occasion. Okay, but if you can get 1,000 artists working together, you can get some staggering artwork. Okay, that has been attempted on a number of fronts on Earth, but usually only a couple of artists.
We're at just about 5 minutes, by the way.
Oh, wow. That quick?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I appreciate the heads up. Now, with that in mind, I've just been informed by Carrie here that we are down to just about the 5-minute mark. Yeah. Well, thanks, Eternity. We only run the hour, which is a good thing because my system doesn't seem to work that well anymore. But with that in mind, let me grab something here. Tomorrow is Saturday. We will be discussing crop circles, a purpose. I'm not going to take a look at the individual crop circles because, let's face it, I don't go on the net to find them. But there is a purpose for them. We will discuss that tomorrow. Then, sometime back, and I did not mark this one down, it was requested that I let people know about my psychic hotline experiences. I spent 20 years working on a hotline. This is one of the reasons why I happen to have a client base where I've touched well over 100,000 clients. Then on Monday, we're going to take a look at your finances, a truth behind saving. And then on Tuesday, we go to self-help, how to move forward. And this is something that so many people don't know how to do. And then just a heads up, the 6th, because I go into my weekend, but the 6th, as in next Friday, I will be on Spaced Out Radio. So I won't be on here for Positive Perceptions. With this in mind, let's get back to where we were. With this in mind, okay, I do want to say thank you so very much for sharing your time with us tonight. Really do appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you again in the very near future. But until then, do take care of yourselves and each other. And for pity's sakes, stay positive.